Have you ever walked away from a conversation and felt completely drained, like a piece of your peace had been stolen without your permission? Michael had that moment just last week. He's 68, retired, and had spent a quiet morning tending to his backyard roses, his sanctuary. But it only took one snide comment from his neighbor. "Those roses don't make you less lonely, old man," to stir up a storm inside him. He didn't yell back. He didn't slam the fence. But all day long, that sentence echoed inside him like an unwanted melody. That night, he couldn't sleep, and he kept asking himself, why does this bother me so much? You see, the battles that exhaust us the most are rarely the ones we fight out loud. They're the ones we keep repeating in our heads, over and over again. That's when Michael met an old Buddhist monk sitting quietly at the park, feeding the birds. His name was Khenpo. His presence was calm, almost immovable, like a mountain untouched by wind. Michael sat beside him, still frustrated, and asked, "How do you stay so calm when people are so cruel?" Khenpo didn't answer right away. He just looked at the birds. Then he said softly, "You don't have to hold what doesn't belong to you." That moment began a journey, not across the world, but inward. What if the real power isn't in responding, but in choosing not to? What if silence, when used wisely, isn't weakness, but wisdom? In today's story, you'll walk alongside Michael as he learns the Buddhist art of selective silence, the powerful freedom of choosing peace over pride, clarity over conflict. And through his transformation, maybe, just maybe, you'll start seeing your own everyday battles a little differently too. Because we all have a Michael in us. We've all had moments where one comment ruined an entire day. We've all fallen into the trap of needing to be right, of needing the last word, only to feel emptier afterward. This isn't about avoiding life. It's about meeting life with a still mind. So if you've ever felt misunderstood, if you've ever been pulled into an argument you never asked for, or if you simply long for more peace in your days, then stay with us. This story was made for you. And if you find a piece of yourself in this story, I gently invite you to support this channel. Subscribe, leave a comment, or simply share it with someone who might need a quiet word today. Because sometimes, the most powerful voice is the one that chooses not to speak. The reaction trap, why we feel the need to respond. Michael stared into the cup of coffee he hadn't touched in 20 minutes. The silence between him and the monk, Khenpo, was thick, not awkward, but thoughtful. The breeze rustled the leaves overhead, and somewhere nearby, a child laughed. Yet inside Michael's chest, a different kind of storm was still swirling. That he finally spoke. "It's not that I wanted to argue. I just couldn't help it. I felt like, if I didn't say something, I'd be weak." Khenpo turned to him with a gentle look in his eyes, the kind that sees through layers. "That feeling," he said slowly, "is not strength. That's conditioning. And that's where many of us find ourselves, trapped in a pattern we never consciously chose. From a young age, we're taught to defend ourselves. If someone pushes you, push back. If someone insults you, stand up for your dignity. We learn that silence means surrender, and surrender means defeat. So we armor up. We prepare our words like weapons. We wait for our turn to speak, not to understand, but to strike." Michael nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's like my mouth starts moving before I even know what I'm saying." Khenpo smiled. "That's the reaction trap. It's like lighting a match. Every time someone throws gasoline near you, and then wondering why there's always fire. And the fire burns long after the other person walks away. That we rarely pause to ask, what am I really defending here? Is it truth? Or is it just pride? For most of us, it's the ego, that fragile sense of self that constantly needs approval, validation, and control. When someone challenges us, they don't just question our words. They shake the little fortress we've built around our identity. And that feels personal. Michael recalled a moment just a week before. He had shared a simple memory from his military days at a neighborhood gathering, only for someone to say, "You always think you're the hero, don't you?" The room had gone quiet. Michael's voice had risen. His chest tightened. It wasn't just about the comment. It was about what it touched in him, a deep place that still questioned if his sacrifices had truly mattered. "I wanted him to feel what I felt," Michael admitted. "But I only ended up feeling worse." "That's how the trap works," Khenpo said. "You think you're fighting for peace, but you're really fighting away from it. Most of our arguments aren't about the topic itself. They're about what the topic represents. One small disagreement can unearth years of unspoken pain, insecurity, or regret. And the person in front of us? They're often just the trigger, not the true source. Khenpo bent down, picked up a small stone from the dirt path, and handed it to Michael. Imagine you're walking towards something beautiful, your peace, your clarity, your joy. And every time someone throws a stone at you, you stop, pick it up, and throw it back. You waste time, you lose direction, and you carry weight that was never yours to begin with. Michael held the stone in his hand, heavy for its size. He realized how often he did exactly that. How many hours of his life had been lost in conversations that went nowhere? How many days had been tainted by someone else's words? He looked up. So what am I supposed to do? Just take it? Let people say whatever they want. Khenpo chuckled. No, not take it. Let it pass. Like wind through trees. You're not a punching bag. You're a mountain. And mountains don't flinch when the wind blows. Michael said nothing for a while. He watched a squirrel dart up a tree, then whispered, "It feels so strange to imagine not reacting." Strange at first, Khenpo said, but freedom always feels strange to those used to chains. In that moment, something small shifted inside Michael. Not a full transformation, but a crack in the armor. A tiny space where a new way of living might grow. One where not every insult needed a comeback. One where silence didn't mean surrender, it meant sovereignty. Because when we stop reacting, we don't just protect our peace. We begin to understand ourselves. The Buddhist perspective, understanding the power of non-reaction. The next morning, Michael returned to the park bench, half hoping and half expecting Khenpo to be there. And there he was, seated quietly under the same tree, eyes closed, hands resting on his knees, as still as the stone statue nearby. Michael sat down beside him, waited a moment, then said quietly, "I've been thinking about that mountain you mentioned." Khenpo opened his eyes, slowly turning to Michael. "And what did you see?" Michael paused. "I realized, I'm not a mountain. I'm more like a leaf in the wind. I get carried away too easily." The monk smiled gently. "Then maybe it's time you stop resisting the wind and start observing it." That morning, they took a short walk through the neighborhood farmers market. The usual weekend crowd bustled with voices, smells, and emotions. As they passed one of the stalls, a man was arguing loudly with a vendor about being overcharged. Michael winced. "You hear that?" "I hear suffering," Khenpo said softly. "Pain trying to find a voice." They watched the vendor, an older woman, remain calm, nodding as the man shouted. She didn't argue. She didn't roll her eyes. She simply waited for the man to finish and said, "I'm sorry you feel that way. Let's look at the receipt together." Michael shook his head. How did she stay so calm? Khenpo looked at him. She didn't take the bait. Then he added, "Let me tell you a story. There was once a man who walked through the marketplace, insulting a monk in front of everyone. He shouted, mocked, and tried to provoke a reaction. But the monk just smiled and walked on. Later, a bystander asked the monk, 'Why didn't you respond?' And the monk said, 'If someone offers you a gift and you do not accept it, to whom does it belong?'" Michael let out a quiet laugh. "That's surprisingly simple." "It is," Khenpo said, "but not easy. You see, Buddhist philosophy teaches that our suffering doesn't come from what others say or do. It comes from our attachment to how we think things should be. When someone criticizes us, the pain we feel is not from the words themselves, but from our attachment to being seen a certain way, being respected, being right. The reaction is born not from truth, but from the ego, and the ego is fragile. It cannot stand to be questioned. It rises quickly to defend itself, needing to control the narrative. But the Dharma, the teaching of the Buddha, guides us differently. It invites us to step back from identification, to see the anger, the offense, the impulse to react, not as you, but as something passing through you. Like clouds passing in the sky, Khenpo said, pointing up. The sky doesn't hold them. It just watches. Michael tilted his head. "But what about when people cross the line? Are we just supposed to let them?" Khenpo nodded thoughtfully. "That's where wisdom enters. Not every silence is wise, and not every word is unkind. But the point is, not to react, but to respond, from clarity, not from heat." He continued, "Non-reaction doesn't mean you suppress your feelings. It means you learn to feel without being ruled by those feelings. Michael thought back to a time when he had snapped at his granddaughter, just because he had been upset earlier that day. She had done nothing wrong. He had carried the weight of a past irritation into a new moment and spilled it on someone who didn't deserve it. That's what we do, Khenpo said, as if reading his thoughts. We carry poison from one moment to the next. Non-reaction is the decision to stop drinking it. They stopped walking for a moment near the pond at the edge of the park. The surface was calm, reflecting the blue sky perfectly. Khenpo picked up a small pebble and tossed it in. Ripples spread outward, disrupting the reflection. Then, slowly, the water stilled again. "This is your mind," he said. "And every provocation is a pebble. You can either keep throwing stones or allow the ripples to settle on their own." Michael stood there in silence, watching the last of the ripples fade. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't trying to fix anything, win anything, or prove anything, that he was simply observing. And in that stillness, something inside him softened. Khenpo turned to him and said, "You don't have to react to everything. Some things are better met with breath than words." Michael smiled, not because he had all the answers, but because he was starting to ask the right questions. When to speak and when to stay silent. The art of selective response. Later that week, Michael found himself sitting across from Khenpo once again, this time beneath the shade of a sycamore tree that swayed gently in the wind. There was something different in Michael's posture now. His shoulders had softened, his breath slower. But his brow still held a question. "Thay," he said, using the Vietnamese word for teacher he'd recently learned. "I've been thinking, what if silence isn't enough? What if people take advantage of it?" Khenpo smiled as if he had been waiting for that question all along. "Ah," he said softly. "Now we arrive at the heart of the practice. Not just silence, but knowing when silence becomes wisdom and when it becomes avoidance." Michael nodded. This was what troubled him. Since beginning this journey inward, he had held his tongue more often, and it felt liberating, but also unsettling. He worried that by not responding, he might be letting people walk all over him, that he was losing his voice. "You see," Khenpo continued, "Buddhism doesn't teach us to be mute. It teaches us to be mindful. There is a time for silence, yes, but there is also a time to speak, and to speak with clarity, not reaction." He leaned in slightly and added, "The Buddha taught us a very simple test before we speak. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind?" Michael repeated the words under his breath. "True, necessary, kind. And if it's not all three?" he asked. "Then perhaps it is better left unsaid," Khenpo replied. There was a long pause between them. Michael picked up a fallen leaf and ran it between his fingers, remembering a recent phone call with his daughter. She had been distant lately, and when she finally called, he felt the urge to confront her with the pain of her absence. But something held him back. Instead, he listened, and slowly, she began to open up. "I didn't say everything I wanted to," Michael admitted, "but somehow, it brought us closer." Khenpo nodded. "That's the art. When we speak from pain, we close hearts. But when we speak from presence, we create space for healing." He added, "Silence is not always passive. Sometimes, it is the most active, intentional thing you can offer. And sometimes, it is your voice that becomes the medicine, if it's used at the right moment." Michael thought again about the arguments he used to get into online. Heated threads, political spats, endless debates with strangers. No one changed their mind. No one grew. All it did was leave him exhausted and angry. "I used to think if I didn't respond, they'd win," he said. "Win what?" Khenpo asked gently. Michael chuckled. "I don't even know anymore. That's because most battles are fought by the ego," Khenpo said. "And the ego doesn't care about truth. It only wants to be right. But wisdom doesn't argue. It reveals." Michael let those words sink in. "But there are times we must speak," he said, more to himself than to the monk. "Like when someone's being mistreated, or when silence could hurt someone." Khenpo's face lit up. "Yes, this is compassion in action. Silence used to protect injustice is not wisdom. It's fear dressed in stillness." He went on, "When your words can protect, uplift, or clarify from a place of inner stillness, then they are not reactions. They are responses, loving responses." Michael sat back, his chest expanding slightly, like he could breathe deeper than before. For the first time in years, he began to see that power didn't always look like control. Sometimes, Power looked like patience. And wisdom didn't always speak. But when it did, it didn't shout. It resonated. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, painting the sky in warm gold, Michael asked quietly, "So how do I know, really know? Which one to choose, silence or speech?" Khenpo pointed to Michael's chest. "Peace will tell you. If you feel heat rising, fists clenching, throat tightening, that's reaction. But if you feel your heart steady, your breath calm, and your words rising from a still place, then that is your wisdom speaking." They sat for a moment longer, letting the sounds of the world move around them. A passing dog barked. A child laughed. A wind chime rang softly from a porch nearby. Michael closed his eyes. In that moment, he didn't need to speak. And that, perhaps, said the most. Practical strategies. How to master the art of ignoring. The next morning, Michael arrived at the park earlier than usual, notebook in hand. He found Khenpo seated under the same tree, legs crossed, eyes closed, face serene. Michael waited patiently, respecting the silence. When Khenpo finally opened his eyes, Michael smiled and lifted his notebook slightly. "I'm ready," he said. "I want to learn how to actually do this. Not just understand it, but live it." Khenpo returned the smile, a glint of warmth in his gaze. "Good," he said. "Understanding is the seed. Practice is the water." And so, sitting in the cool morning shade, with birdsong weaving through the air, the old monk began to share the quiet, powerful tools that help one master the art of not reacting to no. 1. Pause before you react. The first step, Khenpo said, is to pause. That pause is your moment of power. Most people live like a matchbox, one little strike, and they're aflame. But when you create a gap between stimulus and response, you reclaim control. Michael remembered how quickly he used to respond, especially to his son's tone, or when a neighbor made a passive-aggressive remark. No breath, no space, just heat. "Try this," Khenpo said. "When something stings, do nothing for 3 breaths. Just observe your reaction. Don't speak. Don't type. Don't move. Breathe first, then choose." That alone, Michael thought, could change everything. 2. Recognize emotional triggers. Not all fire starts with others, Khenpo continued. Some starts with old wood inside us. He explained how each of us carries emotional triggers, memories, insecurities, and unhealed pain that make certain comments land harder than they should. Awareness is key. Michael reflected on how he'd always reacted strongly when someone questioned his decisions, not because of what they said, but because it touched an old wound about not being respected. Once you know where the firewood is, Khenpo said, you can stop handing out matches. 3. Use gentle deflection. Sometimes, the monk continued, you don't need silence, just softness. When provoked, instead of retaliating or shutting down completely, you can respond gently and diffuse the heat. Phrases like, "I hear you. Let's revisit this later. I don't think this is helpful right now." They don't surrender your dignity. They protect it. Kindness, Khenpo said, isn't weakness. It's strength that doesn't need to shout. 4. Practice non-attachment. Michael looked up from his notes, brow furrowed. This one's still hard for me. Not caring what people think. Khenpo shook his head gently. Not caring. Just not clinging. He explained that practicing non-attachment doesn't mean becoming cold or distant. It means recognizing that other people's words, opinions, and moods don't define who we are. You are not their comment, he said. You are your awareness of it. Michael thought back to the many times he'd lost sleep over someone else's judgment. What a heavy thing to carry, for something that was never his to hold. 5. Build a daily practice of inner stillness. The world is noisy, Khenpo said. To stay calm, you must build quiet within. He suggested a short daily ritual, 10 minutes each morning to sit, breathe, and observe the mind, just like one would observe passing clouds. Even when nothing dramatic happens, Khenpo explained. You're training your mind not to react to every thought, and that becomes the foundation for not reacting to the world. Michael made a note. It sounded simple, but he could already feel its truth as they wrapped up their conversation. Michael looked down at the 5 strategies he had written. They weren't flashy. They didn't promise quick fixes, but they were real, human, achievable, and, more than that, they felt like home. He looked up at Khenpo, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time, steady. Like even if the world spun, he didn't have to spin with it. So, Michael said with a soft grin, ignoring doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing something inwardly. Khenpo smiled, his eyes kind. Yes. Ignoring, when done with awareness, isn't dismissal. It's discernment. Michael folded his notebook shut and exhaled. The wind moved past him, but for once, it didn't move through him. He was learning to be the mountain. The ultimate freedom. Detaching from the need for validation that evening, as the sky turned a deep shade of orange, Michael sat on his porch, sipping tea and watching the world slow down. The conversations with Khenpo had stirred something inside him, something unsettling yet liberating. All his life, he had sought approval in one way or another. In his career, he wanted recognition for his hard work. In his marriage, he wanted to be understood. As a father, he wanted his children to see him as a strong, reliable figure. And even now, in retirement, he found himself wanting his opinions to be acknowledged, his stories to be heard, his presence to be validated. But at what cost? He thought about all the moments he had let himself be dragged into arguments, not because he truly cared about the subject, but because he couldn't stand the thought of someone dismissing him. He needed to be right. He needed to be seen. The next morning, he met Khenpo again at the park. The monk was seated on a stone bench, gazing at a small puddle of water left from last night's rain. Michael sat beside him in silence. After a while, Khenpo spoke. "Do you see that puddle?" Michael nodded. Imagine if it wanted to be as vast as the ocean. It might try to stretch itself, to be more, to take up more space. But in the end, it is still just a puddle, struggling against its nature. Michael frowned. But why should it settle for being small? Khenpo smiled. Because it was never meant to be anything else. And yet, does that make it less important? Less real? Michael stared at the water. We live our lives trying to be bigger, trying to be heard, to be validated, to be acknowledged, Khenpo continued. But do you see the ocean struggling to prove itself? No, it just is. Michael exhaled, a slow, deep breath. So, are you saying I should just stop caring what people think? Not quite, Khenpo said. You should stop needing what they think. The words landed like a stone in Michael's chest. How much of his life had been shaped by this invisible chain? This quiet desperation to be recognized, to be somebody? And in that pursuit, how many moments of true peace had he sacrificed? He thought back to a dinner with his children last year. He had spent the entire evening trying to impress them, subtly mentioning his past accomplishments, correcting their views, inserting his opinions where they weren't needed. What he should have done was simply be there, listen, enjoy their company. But instead, he had been consumed by the need to matter. Khenpo interrupted his thoughts. There is a great freedom in realizing that you do not need to prove yourself to anyone. Your existence is already enough. Michael ran a hand through his silver hair, letting the words settle. So, if someone dismisses me, disagrees with me, I just let it go. Khenpo nodded. If a bird flies past you and does not stop to admire you, do you feel offended? Michael chuckled. No, then why feel offended when a person does the same? Michael sighed, a deep release of something he had carried for far too long. I suppose. I've spent my whole life looking outward for something that was already inside me. Khenpo placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Yes, and now, you are learning to look in the right direction. For the first time in a long while, Michael didn't feel the urge to say anything more. That he simply sat there, next to his teacher, watching the world move around them, without needing to be seen, without needing to be heard, just being. And in that quiet, he found something he had been searching for his entire life: freedom. Mastering the art of inner peace. It had been several weeks since Michael first sat beside Khenpo on that park bench. The conversations, the quiet moments, the stories, they weren't just memories now. They had become practices. His way of seeing the world had shifted. And perhaps more importantly, his way of seeing himself had softened. That he no longer rushed to speak just to defend his pride. He no longer opened every debate like it was a battle to be won. And when someone disagreed with him, online, in person, even in his own family, he had begun asking himself one powerful question: is this worth my peace? Most of the time, the answer was no. One Saturday afternoon, as golden light poured across his porch, Michael sat quietly with a cup of tea. His neighbor, the same one who once made biting remarks about his garden, walked by and gave a slight nod. Michael smiled and raised his tea in acknowledgement. No resentment. No story. Just presence. That was the difference now that he had stopped narrating every encounter in his mind. Stopped assigning meaning to every tone, every glance, every comment. Instead, he had learned what Khenpo had tried to teach him all along. Peace doesn't come from silencing the world. It comes from quieting your own reaction to it. He thought about that puddle in the park, and about how many years he had spent trying to make it deeper, wider, more important in the eyes of others, when all along, it simply needed to be still. And in stillness, it could reflect the sky. That's what this journey had given him. Not just silence, but clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you're no longer pulled in 10 directions, no longer ruled by impulse or insecurity, just centered. Just hold that. Khenpo's words still echoed in him. You don't have to hold what doesn't belong to you. And now, Michael lived those words. Each time someone tried to provoke him, he didn't fight the storm. He let it pass. Because storms don't last. But peace, when cultivated, does. So if you've come this far in the story, maybe something in Michael's journey echoes in yours. Maybe you, too, have grown tired of the noise, the need to be right, the exhausting pursuit of validation. And if so, let this be your reminder. You don't have to react to everything. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. You don't have to prove your worth through words. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing, because your calm is your greatest reply. And if this story touched you in any way, I gently invite you to share it with someone you care about. Leave a comment or subscribe if you'd like to walk further down this path together, because mastering peace isn't a destination, it's a daily decision. And the more of us who choose it, the quieter and kinder this world becomes.